So today is Thursday, July 7th, 2022. My name is Emily Ma, and I'm here with Mr. Shoulong Zhou for the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice. So to start from the very beginning, could you tell us where and when you were born?
Yes, I was born in China, a city called Songzi. It's in Hubei province. Um, I was born on February the 25th, 1988.
And how would you describe the household that you grew up in?
It's just my mom, my dad, and me. I'm the only kid of my family.
That's cool. And could you describe the neighborhood and school district that you went to?
Yeah, I lived at a school. Well, not lived in the school. Is the school is the community, is neighborhood. Because my dad is an educator. So we live in the school. There's several buildings just dedicated to the faculty there. So we live there, and the school I went, it's not quite like the way we're going to school right here. It's not kind of like school district. It's just the entire city. Well, it's not a big city though. The city just they had several elementary school, middle school, high school. I just went wherever I should go. Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
And do you have like favorite memories of your childhood that you like to share, or like favorite memories at school?
That's good question. I think is I think it's when I was young. I visited my grandmother's home. Is kind of like, now it's like 3 hours drive from where my parents lived. So I went there. It's a countryside. The first time I was there, I heard that I got so excited. I was chasing the chickens, the hens, and they're just flying everywhere. It's kind of a mess, but when I kind of recall it, I don't have really clear memory on that, but when I kind of recall it, I just feel like that's some really exciting and funny moment. It's a kind of symbol of um, just happy and free childhood.
Yeah, that sounds really fun. Chickens are very cute.
Yeah.
And then moving on to your parents, where were your parents born and what were their occupations?
They were born in China as well. My mom was born in the city where I was born. My dad was born in a city kind of 3 hours away from where I was born. My dad, he just retired. He was an educator. He taught a lot, and then he also had some administrative positions over the, I don't know, like decades. And my mom was a pharmacist. She worked at a public hospital in our town.
Cool. Do you feel
Yeah.
like your father inspired you to choose the educator route, or was it like your own decision?
That's a quite interesting question, because when I was very young, I've never thought about being an educator. I did not want to be a teacher because I kind of saw my dad work hard, and teachers did not get paid pretty well in China or here as well, right? I'm like, no, I did not want to be a teacher. I my major in college is in law, actually, because I'm still interested in law, but somehow I just encountered education. Then I found, hey, that's pretty cool, and I kind of developed some passion about it, and here's where I landed eventually. Again, education, kind of like repeating my dad's, but not initially inspired by him, but kind of repeating what he's doing, and I enjoyed it, to be honest.
That's cool. That's cool that like both of you kind of like chose the same path, even though you didn't need to.
Yeah.
And what were some like important values or lessons that your parents taught you?
um I can't think of like kind of, I mean, I can't, it's hard to kind of summarize like A, B, C, what values or things they taught me. I think it's more about details or the nuances that they just delivered through our everyday life or conversation, right? For example, being honest. That's my mom is really kind of strict on that. If I lied when I was young, I'm gonna have I would have some really bad consequences, right? And also the value of education. That's I believe for many Chinese or Asian families is that's the number one thing in their families, right? And they always encourage me to go higher in terms of academia, and and the other thing is I remember when I was young, of course there was no iPad, computer, stuff like that. But my dad has a lot of books. He had a lot of books. We had a room dedicated to books, and we got books everywhere at home, and that helped me develop some good reading habits. So books are still my best companions in my nowadays life. Yeah, I think it's a lot, but it's just hard to name A, B, C. Yeah, it's more about like everyday, life and conversation with them.
Yeah, that's great. And
Uh-huh.
did you grow up practicing like traditional Chinese holidays and customs with them as well?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Lunar New Year, Moon Festival. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you have like a favorite food that you used to eat or that you eat now?
Favorite food? I love noodles. Like my wife always say, "Hey, you can't survive without noodles, huh?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can't survive without noodles."
Have you
Yeah.
ever eaten like the really long noodle? Like it's supposed to symbolize like long life or something.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. It's to me, it's more like a old generation thing, like my grandparents. But to us, it's like we know that that's a thing, right? But we don't really, kind of put a lot of thoughts on that. Which is yeah, we just enjoy the food.
yeah.
Yeah,
um
yeah. But interesting is yeah, because my wife's mom, my mother-in-law, they really treat noodles, the long noodles, as a symbol of long living. Every birthday, every every time we have someone having a birthday, she would cook long noodles for them. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
yeah, it's definitely like a symbolic thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so moving on to kind of your education. So you attended Yangtze University for your bachelor's,
Mhm.
and like you said, you
Yeah,
studied law.
yeah.
So what kind of drew you first to that field, and did you enjoy your overall college experience?
What is a what? Sorry,
Oh,
can you repeat that?
yeah. So what drew you to the field of law, and did you
Uh-huh.
enjoy your overall college experience?
Uh-huh. Yeah. I just when I was in high school, I just feel like, I wanted to do something related to, to humanities, to, law, economics, stuff like that. I did not have a clear kind of map what I wanted to do after graduation, but I feel like law was always something I was quite interested in, and um, yeah, then I just applied the law school, not apply. I just chose to go to law school for my college. When I was in college, yeah, I enjoyed it very much. It's definitely not like the college experience like you guys have in America, right? It's not. I would say the college I went, it was not quite hard. That gave me a lot of freedom to read, to just enjoy life, or to do part-time job. Like one of the part-time jobs I did is to teach over the weekend. That's how I got into education. So I made a lot of friends. I learned English a lot just by myself using the free time when I was in college. So yeah, I really enjoyed the 4-year college in China. Yeah.
Very cool. And was Yangtze University like solely a law school, or was that just like one
No,
portion of it?
no, it's a big school. It's a big kind of very comprehensive university. The law department just a department of just a department of the university.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, and having attended higher education both in China and in the US at U of H,
Mhm.
How would you compare your experiences between the two? And did you find the teaching philosophies to be different?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Of course, language, right, and also pedagogy is quite different. In China, I would say not just in college, is the entire pedagogy is mainly, I'm not saying every teacher, every student, right? Mainly is teacher centered. You got a lecture, and you study, and then you go for exam. That's pretty much it, right? But right here, when I was at U of H, it's all about seminars, right? You got to read a lot. You do your research, you prepare questions, you have to deepen your understanding by a lot of approaches. Then you come to the class, it's just like seminar, seminar, seminar. I was struggled. I struggled a lot when I first got here. Entering the U.S. Classrooms, and it just took time for me to really get used to the pedagogy, the way of learning. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah, that's probably the most shocking or uncomfortable part for me. In terms of comparing the Chinese classrooms versus the U.S. college classrooms.
Yeah, and like along a similar vein, in prepping high schoolers for college, what do you
Mhm.
think are the pros and cons of like the Chinese versus American ways? Like in China, there's like the national exam, and then in the
Yeah.
US, it's a bit more holistic, and there's like
Uh-huh.
you have to consider different things like SAT grades.
Yeah, it's that's a really good question, Emily. Yeah, I'm I don't know. It's So first of all, I think is the systems are quite different, right? In China, for example, for me to get into a college, the only thing I needed to do was to prepare for my college entrance exam. You did good on it, great. You go to a good school. You failed it, sorry, you probably have no school to go to, or a second or third tier of college. That's where you could land, right? If you did not do quite well on that. But right here, the schools look at your SAT, your GPA, your personal statements, your recommendation letters, whatever. Um, I don't see much thing to compare with in terms of that. The way it works, the ways it works are so different. But I do see there is something that both Chinese students can learn from American students, American students can learn from Chinese students. Is that one thing I have to say that at least my experience in China, the students are really resilient. Like they complain, they don't complain. Okay, they do complain, but not as much as right here. Right here, you can see that students say, "Oh, it's too much homework. Um, can I do this, do that?" I'm sorry, there's no excuse you can give when if you're in China, right? I'm not saying that's a bad thing to complain or to advocate for what you want, but I do see the resilience, the hardworking, value is really, really emphasized in Chinese education. On the other hand, what Chinese students can learn from American students is that students here in the US, they really know how to advocate for themselves. That's very, very important to me. One thing I dislike my education experience is that like I said, probably students in China, they have too much resilience. They just go whatever they were told to do, right? That's not good in many of the ways. So I really wish. I'm also teaching Chinese students online sometimes, and do some other cross-cultural programs. I told the Chinese students, hey guys, you guys are new generation, you cannot repeat what I experienced or older generation had in terms of education. When you have a problem, for example, mental issues, mental health, right? Mental health was not even a thing when I was in school. But hey, if you have one, absolutely 100% you have to advocate for yourself. That's something I hope students in China or kids in China could learn from, from students are doing really well right here. Well, not everybody, right? Just in general. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to kind of break the cycle with the new generation.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah, I definitely agree. There's pros and cons to each teaching method.
Uh-huh. Yes.
So what prompted you to move to the US to pursue your master's degree, and what also drew you over from law to
Uh-huh.
educational psychology?
Uh-huh. Okay, first from China to here, I did not even think about that until I was a junior in college, because I had a part-time job teaching in an English school, weekend English school when I was in China, starting from my sophomore year. It's a great English training school. I got a position there. I was lucky to meet some of colleagues who had the experience learning abroad. They were just saying, "Hey, I was actually preparing for my uh, graduate school exams in China at that time." They were like, "Hey, have you ever thought about applying for applying out like colleges in US, Canada, or European countries?" I was like, that sounds quite an interesting idea. I was young, really bold. I did some research. I'm like, okay, let me just give it a shot. And then I did more research. I talked to my family, and then I started to prepare for my TOEFL, the English exam, GRE, and all the materials. Then yeah, I somehow I landed at U of H. Yeah, that's kind of like a quick going over going through of the experience. And education, like I said, yeah, I did not even think about being a educator or teacher when I was young, but just because of the part-time job, just my interest is my purpose of getting the teaching part-time job when I was in college was to earn some extra cash. And it turned out that it went pretty well. I feel like it's something I can do really, really well. And then, the more you like it, the more you do it, you just sometimes it just ended to be your life thing, right? So yeah.
Yeah, little did you know you would become an educator for like your career. um, yeah, so I know you described like the differences in teaching philosophies being kind of a
Mhm.
shock to you.
Mhm.
Could you describe like the overall experience moving from China to the US as a young adult who had like just graduated college?
Mhm. Um, First of all, absolutely, there are many, big or small cultural shocks when I first got here. Like I said, the teaching styles, right? And also even small things like I remember one of the examples I give to my students a lot is that when you're in China, when you eat, right? A lot of Chinese people you wouldn't see them lick their fingers. For example, if the food is really good, they would lick their fingers. But right here, I mean, right here, and it's a normal thing. I do it a lot. It just becomes a part of me as well. But in China, if you do that, people will say you have to pay more attention to hygiene. That's what they say, right? Yeah, it's just like small things, big things as well. And over the 12 years I've been here, I got shocks. I still got shocks, cultural shocks. Uh, for example, of course, it's more about cultural, more about society, more about the history of the country, right? For example, the um, anti-Asian, hate crimes happen, since the pandemic. That was a shock. That actually has been driving me to read more, to know more about the history, to know more and more about what exactly does this country mean to everybody, right? To immigrants, to second generation immigrants, to natives, to white, to black, to Asians. Yeah, it's my experience is refreshed every day. I would say that it refreshes every time I talk to, for example, you, to my colleagues, my students. It's refreshed every time I go to a seminar, workshop, or even it's refreshed every time I teach a lesson, have interaction with students, with colleagues. Yeah, it's it's evolving. I would say that. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a constant, like never ending kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And if you could offer advice to any other young adults who plan to start a life in another country, what would you say?
Um, I would say be brave. Yeah, maybe just be brave. That's probably the first thing. Because the first time you got to a new country, a new culture, there are a lot of unpredictable things. There are a lot of things you will feel uncomfortable with. There are a lot of quote by quote cultural shocks, right? But eventually human beings are the same, right? And we have common language like smile, right? Like gestures, stuff like that. Keep that in mind, and also be brave to try a lot of things. Um, if you, I see many international students from, particularly from China, when they first got here, they don't have the courage to face a lot of challenges. They just try to find a way to avoid them. For example, focusing on computer games, lock them in their rooms, or not talk to others except some maybe friends who are also from China and they speak Chinese every day, stuff like that. That's not a good way if you really want to find a place in a foreign country, or really find connection with the with another culture, or someone else. That's just be brave, just walk out, just try a lot of things. Yeah, one thing I really appreciate I did when I first got here, I tried a lot. I took many opportunities to walk out from my dormitory, talk to people, applying jobs, just bit by bit, getting to know more about my surroundings. Yeah. Just be brave. Yeah. Walk out. Get out of your comfort zone. I should say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice.
Thanks.
Yeah. And in like college or in your master's program, did you have any professors or mentors who left a lasting impact on your life?
Yeah. I do. I Oh my gosh, it's been so long. The department chair. I can't. That's a shame. I couldn't remember his name. Oh, Dr. Orlenchak. And I don't think he's still at the U of H, but he was very helpful. I enjoyed every lesson he taught, and he was just so kind, because I think he knew that I was new to this country, to this new program. Everything was new to me. He was just so kind, responding all my emails, answering my questions, and sometimes just be generous to to my probably not doing quite well in seminars, or homework, stuff like that. He was very patient. He's probably one of, not one of the best professors I've ever had when I was at UVH. Yeah, it was, sometimes as a newcomer to this country, as an international student, like I said, it's just a lot of unpredictable things, just a lot of unknown. You definitely, if someone like, especially your teacher, your professor, showed you some kindness and understanding, and patience, that would really make their day, the students' day. Yeah, I really appreciate him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important to have like a support system, especially if you're new to this country.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I probably should have asked this earlier, but did you move with your parents or did you come alone?
I came here alone. Yeah, I came here with 2 luggages. That's it. I did not know anybody here. Well, I did some research that got connected with some students who also came to U of H for grad programs, and also some church friends before I landed here. But literally, I did not know anybody before I came here.
That's a really scary move.
Yeah. What I was thinking about, it's quite interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that. When I'm thinking back right now, I was like, how did I do that? Without knowing anybody, just 2 luggages. I just got here, but at that moment, like I said, I felt like I was just bold, I was just brave, and just, what the heck, I'm just going. I don't care whether or not I know anybody, I'm just going. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like in the moment, sometimes you can be like, yeah, let's just do it.
Yeah, you're just so focused on what you need to do rather than, getting scared or afraid of, the future.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So moving on to your career,
Mhm,
as a high school teacher at the postdoc school, you teach a range of subjects, including
mhm,
Chinese,
mhm,
Asia studies, and global politics.
mhm.
So what is it like juggling different curriculums? And could you walk us through a day in your life or a day in your week?
Yeah, of course. At postdoc, we're a pretty small school. I mean, in terms of the high school, we only have about 90 students in total. So you can see that it's like 20 to 25 students per class. Our schedule also is not scheduled as, conventional schedule at public schools or big private schools as well. So every day my schedule is different every day over a week. For example, on some days, I would have full of classes. I would have, the first and second hour Chinese, maybe third hour just prep hour. After lunch, I have 2 hours of global politics. Last hour, I would have another Chinese class, and maybe another day I was it probably is not as loaded as, the previous day. I probably only have 1 hour, for example, global politics, and then the rest of the time I can just prepare for my classes. We at postdoc, we just have more, some, well, not extra, just other opportunities to explore by yourself or explore with the students what you want to do, right? For example, the trips, we have A and J terms, like mini terms uh, that the students can, or the teacher can choose to, lead the students to a, let's say, a trip. This year we went to San Francisco. That would take a lot of time to prepare for it, and yeah, we can use our time to do that. Yeah, in terms of curriculum prep, um, it could be just individual work. For example, me, I'm the only teacher teaching Chinese Mandarin at postdoc high school, and I used a kind of well-established online curriculum called Discovering Chinese. Of course, I do tweaks, and also I develop my own kind of style of practice for my students. Um, for global politics or some other humanities classes, I usually, team with another teacher, or some other teachers will work together, just, um, put what we know, what we want to do together, and then develop a curriculum for our students. So it depends. And also we have, because we're an independent school, we kind of have a certain amount of freedom to, uh, to kind of do what we think best fit for our students. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like similar to what you were saying, postdoc is Montessori. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, it promotes like more freedom for students. Was
Yes.
that an important factor for you when you were deciding like where to teach, or how did you decide that postdoc was the one for you?
That's a really good question. Yes, I would say the freedom, the Montessori way of teaching and learning is one of the main factors I chose to work at a postdoc. Um, I had experience teaching math in middle school, charter middle school in Arizona. I think that's year of 2015 to 2016. It's quite interesting. It's a charter school. I think they're one of the largest charter schools in the country right now. They're developing so fast. And I had some connection with them. Just I helped them building, the cross cultural programs. They were like, hey, how do you want to come to here to work with us, teach with us? I'm like, sure. So I went there. I was brought there initially to teach language, but they were like, we probably don't have that much interest in learning Chinese language, but we have high demanding math teachers. I had never taught math before, but they were like, do you want to try? I'm like, sure. Then they sent me to do the evaluation or qualification exams. Then I passed. and then I ended, teaching a year of math there for a year. That's a traditional public school. The working environment and the pedagogy were so different than postdoc. And then I decided to come back to postdoc just 1 year after teaching there. I'm like, no, this is because at that school I just repeated everything. I just repeated, for example, a lesson, right? 7 or 6 times a day. You just repeat giving that lesson. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, done. Then grading homework. Then you go home, probably do some, extra work. But at postdoc, because it's Montessori, because the school encouraged both the teachers and students to follow their passion, right? I got a lot of freedom. I got a lot of, kind of flexibility to work with my students, what they want, or what I would suggest them. Hey, probably you may want to try this. The work amount is not as little as it's still a lot of work at postdoc, but as I described it to other people, you're creating every day. Instead of you're repeating things every day, you're creating. So that's one of the major factors that I really enjoy teaching at postdoc.
Well, it sounds like it lets you be a bit more flexible in your teaching.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also saw that it teaches kids ranging from 14 months old all the way to 12th grade. So is that all in the same building, or how does that work?
At postdoc, we have 2 campuses. The middle school and the high school is in Museum District. It's pretty close to Rice, and our we call it main campus or Bissonnette campus. It's housing 14 months to up to elementary, to primary. Elementary. Yeah. So yeah, at our campus is only middle school and high school.
I see. And do you ever teach middle schoolers, or do you stick just to high school?
Just the high school.
I see. And also, having been at postdoc since 2016, how do you think your teaching style has evolved through the years?
I couldn't give a very, brief or like a summary of how it evolves. But if I kind of recall it, I can definitely see the self-development, right? The first time I walked into the classroom, well, actually, I started to work with them from the year of 2012, the year the high school was established. But I was working as a contractor, coming back, relocating back from Arizona. I became a kind of their direct employee. Even then, I'm thinking about the first class I walked into the classroom meeting with the students, and now when I walked into a classroom, it's quite different. Your mental state, the confidence. You're just feeling like every day you're more prepared than the previous day, right? Because teaching is like any other job. It's the more the more you do, the better you get, right? And it's hard to summarize that summarize into ABC how I evolved, but it's definitely, I would just say I'm just getting better and better every day, probably every semester. Yeah.
That's great. It sounds like teaching is kind of like a muscle. You just have to keep like working at it.
Absolutely, yes.
And kind of related, what is one thing that you wish more like new coming teachers would know?
Don't panic, I would say. Yeah. As a new teacher, even to me, if I walk into brand new class, right? Even if I'm well prepared in terms of curriculum, lesson plans, materials, walk into that classroom facing a new kind of combination of students, it could be a little scary, even for experienced teachers, but don't panic, right? You'll find a way. And also always keep in mind that your students are there for you, and also your colleagues are around to help you. That's also one thing I really appreciate over my teaching career, that I got a lot of mentorship, a lot of just great guidance from my colleagues, my more experienced colleagues, or just in general colleagues, and also a lot of understanding and patience from my students. So don't panic, you'll be fine. Yeah, it's just like you said, a piece of muscle. The more you use it, the stronger you get. Yeah, don't panic.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
like especially for younger students, it's kind of hard to see teachers as like humans as well. But I think the older that you
yes,
get, you kind of realize that they're also
yeah,
just there's just
yeah,
humans.
absolutely. Yep.
Um, so could you tell us like the most fulfilling memory or part of teaching that you've had so far?
Mm, I would say that's not something happening in my classroom, but is the trip I led in China. Um, I think that's year of 2019, before the pandemic. We run the China trip programs twice, and the second time is definitely the because the first time you kind of trying to get to know what exactly you're trying to do. The second time you got more experienced, and the second time the China trip was definitely the highlight of fulfilling. If to me, it's very fulfilling because I feel like the students learn a lot, and um, the just the goals you set for the course, for the trip, were all met, and everybody was happy, and both of the teachers and the students learned a lot, and they got a lot of chances exploring the culture, making connections with host families, the host schools. We just viewed a lot of great places, visit a lot of great places. And for some of the students, when they came back, you can see the change. And as a teacher, when you see that a lesson or an experience or even just a talk you had with the student would make changes, I mean good changes for sure, right, on them, that's always the most fulfilling moments, right? And the China trip is one of them. I still give people example that one of the students on that trip said, if this is China, I'm wondering what the rest of the world would be like. I'm glad that I helped them to kind of have opened a gate, not a gate, window, not a big window, maybe just a small window, to let them see, hey, there are bigger, much bigger world outside, in this world, in this universe, waiting for you to explore, to see, and to just wander around. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a really cool like trip or program.
Yeah.
Do you have plans to like continue? I guess like right now in the pandemic, it's kind of hard,
Yeah.
but like maybe in a few years or so.
Yes. If it were not the pandemic, our China trip programs would go on. But yeah, and we do want to go back to visit the host families, the schools, and also the places in China. But the pandemic, and also the other thing is the U.S. China relations, and it becomes a kind of very hard to say situation. But yeah, well, trips is, the trip programs are always a big part at my school at Post-Oak. Even probably if it's not China, we may want to visit some other cultures or countries in Asia. We're planning on it, but yeah, we don't know yet. Yeah.
Yeah, fingers crossed that it works out. Because yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's a very eye-opening experience. Very important.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so on the flip side, what would you say is like the biggest challenge that you've encountered as a teacher?
Mm, I would still say my cultural background, and the culture I'm sitting in, I'm in, right? Because especially at the beginning of my teaching career, especially when I was teaching at the charter school, um, because I was brought up in I was educated in the let's say the Chinese way, the Asian way, the majority of my life, right? And when you teach, especially like I said in my earlier teaching career, the patterns would be seen from me in the way that how I teach my students, but some of the ways are not, let's say, the American way, or the Western way. Um, one of, I don't know if it's appropriate to put this way, is that the way I was brought up, the way I was educated was teacher centered, right? And that could mean a lot of things. It does not just mean that the teacher just giving lectures, do much of the talking. That's not just about it. And it's also about the communication you have with the students, right? I did not, I was at failed on that at the early years of my teaching. Especially at the public school, because it's first of all, it is tougher to teach at a public school in a poor area than from teaching at an independent school. Let's put it that way, in a more affluent area, right? And the second thing is mainly about me. When I was reflecting, is the challenge I have in terms of communication, building connections with the students. It was the biggest challenge ever. Yeah, especially working at the public school, the charter school. But right now, I see that as the major thing as a teacher, as a mentor, or as the advisor. And that's even more important to me than delivering your curriculum. I also do sometimes do training to educators in China. I told them, hey, if you want to work with probably new generation kids, try to think outside the box of the Chinese way or Asian way of teaching. Definitely build relationships, build connection with them first, because without that, you wouldn't find it easy to teach them anything you want to teach. Yeah, it was I would say sometimes still it's a challenge, because every student is different, right? It could be still a challenge, but it was the greatest challenge at my early years of being an educator right here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the times younger teachers or like newer teachers are more versed in emotional intelligence, and maybe that's why they can connect a bit more with their students.
Yes.
But yeah, there's also like, I go to Rice and there's a lot of like older professors who are also like very emotionally intelligent. So
right.
Definitely not limited
Yeah.
by age.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I also saw that you're involved with promoting DEIJ at Postdoc, so diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice.
Yes.
So could you tell us a bit about your work?
About my work?
Sorry, yeah. Could you tell us a bit about your work there?
Oh, yes. So actually I stepped out from the postdoc DEIJ committee just because I got so busy. But I'm still part of the conversation. I'm still dedicated to do that. Outside of postdoc, I'm also a founding member of a kind of grassroots organization called Courageous Dialogues with Chinese Educators. CDCE is also a organization focusing on having conversations about DEIJ with Chinese teachers, Chinese teachers and teachers who are teaching Chinese language or Chinese culture. So first of all, my interest or my dedication or my commitment to this work came out from the pandemic, the anti-Asian hate crimes. That started from there, and then it has been driving me to do a lot of research, do a lot of reading, having more conversations with others, and reflecting more about it. Then I kind of realized that being an educator, you always have the privilege to do some, let's say, ideal work, right? You want to create a better world, right? Then I started to advocate more, integrate more, DIJ related topic into my curriculum, in my teaching, and I started to talk with other educators, especially the educators who has Chinese background or Asian cultural background or teaching Mandarin, Chinese language and culture. Then we start to have the conversation. Those all foster me with a, I don't know, maybe better or more comprehensive understanding of DIJ. That's how I got really interested and passionate and committed to this work. And in terms of specific work, like I said, at postdoc, I've been bringing those topics into my curriculum, language curriculums, and also global politics curriculums, and also other Asia and Asian studies programs, trips. Outside of postdoc, I'm working with other educators, trying to promoting the conversations, the dialogues, focusing on DIJ. I just feel like it's very important to have this conversation, especially right now. Yeah. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and although like these are kind of long-standing issues, we're seeing like a surge of tragedies in the US, such as mass shootings and racial hate crimes. So has your work with DEIJ and the CDCE lended you new perspectives on how to talk to your students about these issues, and then also like how we as a society can kind of grow and improve?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to talk about one thing about that. The more I work in this area, the more I read or I see, I hear about the way people are talking about it, the more I realize that one, it has to be a grassroots work. It's hard to do it from the top to the bottom. You cannot expect the government, the president, the Senate to, well, of course they can do something, right? But it's hard to do it from the top to the bottom, like I said. But to me, it's more like to build the bed, the grassroots. As an educator, I have the privilege to influence my students, right? To let them know the ideas of DEIJ, to build a better world. I always say to them, hey guys, we're getting old and we're gonna be counting on you to build a better world, right? And the other thing about it is to me, to systematically change something, it's hard. I'm not saying it's undoable. It's just so hard. You would face a lot of challenges, a lot of pushbacks. I'm not saying it does not work to do it. Of course it does, right? But to me, as just a nobody, if you still want to do something to help to promote DIJ, start from the grassroots work. Talk with Emily, right? Talk with your colleague, talk with your colleagues, your fellow educators, right? And help them to think more about it. It's just one drop of water. It looks like really small, right? It probably would not make a big effect, but what about everybody does it, right? And I do it to Emily. Emily, you talk with someone else, and your friends then talk to someone else. It will make something, even though it's slow, right? That's why the path I chose to do it right now is more about, focusing on grassroots work. Even with my students, I built many DIJ conversations, even small conversations, even just a couple of sentences in my curriculum. It would mean something to them, I hope, right? That's probably the major kind of takeaway, from the experience working on DIJ and working with the CDC organization.
Yeah, I agree. I think sparking conversation is very important.
Yeah. And you remind me another thing. Another takeaway is civil discourse, right? If you're looking at the media, if you're looking at the news, and sometimes you witness the ways people are talking about for example, racial issues, right? I don't think that should be the way people have conversation, because without respect, without mutual respect, you cannot make any deal. You cannot make any progress. So civil discourse, that should be always the foundation whenever we're talking about an issue like DEIJ.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And now that we're kind of like slowly returning back to normal life from the pandemic, how have you and your students and your colleagues been dealing with COVID and like Zoom the past 2 years?
It's tough, especially at the very beginning. Our school went on online teaching, Zoom teaching, whatever. After right after the spring break of year 2020, so we did not return back to school. We stayed online until the next year, year of 2021. We open it, we make it optional, and then as teacher, we did a hybrid learning. Students can either stay in the classroom or they can just Zoom in online, right? It has been really challenging because nobody did that, and there's a lot of technology problems. You have to adjust your pedagogy. You have to adjust your curriculum. Everything is new, was new, right? And I mean, it still is new, right? Because we're not 100% out of the pandemic. But I'm really glad that I got a good team, my school, backing up there, providing me and the students what they want. And right now, because we've been back for like a year or something, so we can see that things are kind of getting back to normal. But we still have some, protocols. We are, I mean, before the summer, right? We still had the some protocols we had up with. Yeah, right now, to be honest, I personally, I don't feel much difference from the pre-pandemic era. The only big thing that I feel like us as a school is missing during the 2 years is the sense of community. You don't expect to build a community just through Zoom, right? It has to be in person. It has to be, people sitting together to talk, to have conversation, to bond with each other. It has to be that way. That's something that I would feel, and I would believe that many of my colleagues were just educators and students as well in general would feel would have the kind of something's missing part. I think that's a part of missing the connection, the community sense. Yeah, but I mean, everybody's trying to kind of bring it back right now, or let's call it the post-pandemic age. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's like almost impossible to build a community over Zoom, or like, because
Yeah.
At least like when I was taking Zoom classes, like if the camera on wasn't required, I would just kind of take it in bed like sideways.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yep.
How
long have you guys been? How long did you guys stay online at Rice?
At Rice, so my freshman year was like almost entirely online, except for like labs and like maybe a few like very, very small classes. And then my sophomore year, which is like what I just passed, it was more hybrid, I would say. Like some of my classes were fully online, especially if they were like bigger lectures. But the smaller classes were like had the option of being in person or online.
Okay. Yeah. Did you have to stay in Houston, or could you like Zoom in from Boston from your home?
So in freshman year, there was like an option. I forget if it was both semesters, but at least first semester, it was an option to be at home. So like that's why that campus was so like empty, because not everybody was even on campus.
Right. I see. Yeah, it's definitely tough times.
Yeah. I chose to be on campus for my freshman year, but it was kind of like a ghost town. And then everybody was still like wearing the masks.
Yeah,
like outside and stuff. Yeah. So how was hybrid learning like in your classroom? Did people choose to show up more, or like were they mostly on Zoom?
I would say half, and also of course, more people, came back to the classroom eventually, right? But at the beginning, I think it's kind of half and half. Yeah, we just have the devices called OWL. It's like kind of multi direction camera. You put it in the middle of the classroom. It collects the sound, the images. Yeah, yeah. I would say half and half for almost all the classes. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like my last question before we move on to like more of the fun like identity questions, I guess.
Uh-huh.
What is something that you hope all of your students can walk away with from their time at Post Oak?
Mm, wow, that's a very good question. There's just so many things I want them to walk away from, but to name one thing, I probably just want them to walk away with, from Post Oak that they can see some positive change in their life. It could be just a thought, right? And yeah, maybe just change. It really depends on the individuals. Um, it could be like a perspective about a culture, or about an issue, and then at the moment they're walking out from Post Oak, they will say, "Oh, I thought it was that way, but after 4 years at Post Oak, I've been deepening my understanding on this issue. Now, this is the way I understand it, and this is the way I can help to um, solve it or make it better." Yeah, maybe that's the thing I want them to work with from Post Oak.
Yeah, and kind of like in a similar vein, you describe yourself as a lifelong learner. So, what is like your favorite thing or like fun fact that you've learned recently?
Um, I just finished UK trip with my wife. I came back 10 days ago, and it's a 14-day trip. When I was in UK, absolutely there's a lot of differences. But I'm personally very interested in languages, and I knew I learned many differences between the Britain English and American English. I remember my friends' kids, they told me that the sneakers, the shoes, the sports shoes in UK is called trainers. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool, right? And some other, pronunciation wise thing, that's quite interesting. And there are other, just cultural things about UK. Like they don't call their schools like public school, private school, or public school versus independent school. They call, when they say it's a public school in UK, it's not it's not publicly funded school, and it could be a private school, but they're just open their doors to any applicants. The public school we're talking about in the US, they call it state school. Quite interesting. And yeah, it's and also the strikes, right? And when we were there, there was a big strike. The subway workers strike, and it just paralyzed the subway for a day. We did not go anywhere on the last day when we were there because of the strike. And I don't think I've seen any of that in Houston, at least. But when I feel like the power of the people, the power of the union can do that kind of an impact, that's kind of like a good learning. Yeah. There's some other stuff I couldn't remember. I couldn't, just name some other details, just kind of random stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I have a friend. She's also in this internship actually, but she had an entire semester abroad
Uh-huh.
in England, in London.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. I really enjoy Britain. It's beautiful. It has just a lot of history. Yeah. A lot of cultural aspects of it. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And then how do you like identify yourself? And this can be in terms of like your ethnicity, your religion, if you have one,
Mhm,
core
mhm,
beliefs or anything else.
mhm. I would say good question. When you talk about identity, it could come from many aspects, right? Ethnicity wise, of course, I'm a Chinese, right? And but more on that, I think I'm a still developing Americanized Chinese, still developing Americanized first generation Chinese immigrant. Yeah, and yeah, I identify myself as a he slash him, and I'm a Christian. Um, um, what else? I'm a husband. Um, yeah, I see myself as a family man. Um, yeah, I'm not a party guy. I like to read. I like to watch films. I like to think. Yeah, and but I also think that um, I don't know. Yeah, any specific aspect or perspective you wanted me to talk about my identity?
No, I think that's good. Just like anything that
Okay,
you feel would
okay,
describe yourself. Yeah.
okay. All right.
And then what are some of your current hobbies and interests outside of your career?
Mm, I like to watch games. I used to play a lot of basketball, but over the years, especially the pandemic, this kind of like routine faded away. I'm trying to pick it up, but I do enjoy basketball and football, American football. Other than that, reading it took me many of my time, and also traveling. Oh yeah, traveling. That's definitely the biggest thing in my family. To me and my wife, we traveled. We can't say we're well traveled, but we traveled like maybe 3 to 4 times per year. If there were no pandemic, yeah, we still have our lease there. Yeah, traveling. That's definitely the top one thing that I would love to do when I have kind of like summer break. Yeah.
Do you have any upcoming plans to travel, or have you already traveled this summer?
Yeah, I've already traveled to UK last month. Yeah, for 2 weeks. Yeah, I'm actually departing to Baltimore tomorrow. It's for professional development about American immigration history. That's gonna be my second, also maybe the last trip I would make during the summer.
Very cool. And
Yeah.
are you planning to visit China anytime in the next few years or so?
As long as soon as China opens the door, China, kind of put down its unbelievable COVID regulations. Yeah, it's just very hard to. I desperately want to visit my family, but just because of the pandemic and the regulations China has right now, I don't think I could make it. Of course, this year or even next year, it's very hard. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah,
Yeah, hopefully like maybe within the next decade or so.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as soon as the door opens, like widely. Yeah,
Yeah.
like yeah, my friends and I will even talk about now the hardest for us, the Chinese nationals, the hardest place we can travel now is China itself, our homeland. Yeah, I can easily travel to Europe or some other countries or places, but yeah, yeah, it I hope it's getting better. Yeah,
Yeah, I hope so too. Um,
thank you.
and my last question would be like if you could go back in time and give a piece of advice to your younger self, what would you say?
Mm. Uh, here's the thing. I'm kind of person that I never thought I made any bad decisions. Not saying that all my decisions are wise or smart decisions. No, I did not mean that. To me, I have kind of the philosophy that everything or every decision has both sides. It will lead you to one direction. At this point, because I'm happy with my life, I'm happy with my work, I'm happy about who I am right now. I wouldn't think there's anything I would want to I wouldn't want to change if I can time travel back to a certain time. Um, yeah. So I don't think I have any advice to give to younger me, to be honest. Just be yourself, just, enjoy your life, seize the days, yeah, just that. Yeah, let God lead you to wherever, it kind of sounds like really religious, but yeah, just let God lead you to wherever he wanted to land. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. Um, yeah, so that's all of the questions that I have prepared, but do you have anything else that you want to add?
Um, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, I think it's also a good opportunity, for me to kind of review my path, career wise, life wise as well. Yeah, it's good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for this interview and have a good trip to Baltimore and yeah, have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. Enjoy your summer, Emily.
Thank you so much. All right, bye bye.
Okay, bye.